When society still functions, your home is nothing more than a structure. But when a crisis shuts down every support system, power, water, security, medical response, that same structure turns into a sealed battleground. No alarms, no backup, no outside intervention. Only you, the silent walls surrounding you, and the threats that have always existed but remained invisible because the world around you was still operating. In the first hour of collapse, people do not rush outside. They retreat inward. They lock doors, drag furniture to block entry points, and turn their living spaces into improvised fortresses. And it is at that exact moment, when the outside world becomes unstable, that the inside of the home begins to shift into something far more dangerous. What used to feel like protection becomes a pressure chamber where physics, heat, air, and human behavior start working against you. Pipes that once behaved predictably transform into channels for backflow and contamination. Air that used to circulate freely becomes stagnant pockets capable of holding toxic buildup. Every doorway converts into a choke point that can be exploited. Every sound you make suddenly travels farther than you expect, revealing your position to anyone desperate enough to be listening. You are not being attacked by rioters or looters alone. You are being attacked by the collapse of the systems you once depended on. This is not a warning meant to frighten. This is a tactical briefing. When order collapses, the home does not remain safe by default. It becomes danger by default. From this moment on, you must view every wall, every pipe, every vent, and every corner with the mindset of a survivor. Someone who understands that any weakness ignored today will become a threat tomorrow. You are about to see 8 hidden dangers that reveal themselves only in crisis. If you fail to identify them, they will identify you first. Water inside a stable society behaves the way you expect it to. It flows on command, drains on command, and stays invisible inside the walls that hide it. But the moment a crisis shuts down municipal pressure, your home's plumbing system enters a silent, unstable state. What was once a harmless network of pipes becomes a sealed maze of trapped air, dead pressure zones, and pockets of contaminated liquid waiting for the slightest imbalance to push them in the wrong direction. Most people never think about what happens inside their plumbing when the flow stops. They assume no water simply means nothing comes out. In a crisis, that assumption becomes a threat. When the pressure drops, water inside the pipes begins to stagnate. Air pushes in from weak seals. Wastewater from the sewer line can reverse direction and creep upward, carrying pathogens and chemical residue into sinks, drains, and toilets. A single flush during a blackout can create a backflow surge capable of spreading contamination through multiple rooms. Your home, the place you sleep and shelter in, becomes its own biological hazard. This is not dramatic. It is mechanical reality. Without outward pressure, every pipe in your house becomes a chamber capable of implosion, cracking, or slow, undetected leakage. And every leak becomes a target indicator. Sound, smell, humidity, something a desperate outsider can follow. Water is not just a resource in crisis, it is bait. Anything that signals access to it draws attention. You must understand this. The moment the municipal system dies, the water inside your home belongs to physics, not to you. Pressure imbalance, vacuum lock, backflow. These are not abstract concepts. They are direct threats. If you don't identify, isolate, and control your internal water points, the system will work against you. And once contamination enters your home, it will spread faster than you can contain it. turning your strongest refuge into a compromised zone. Your survival depends on recognizing that still water is not safe water. Dead pressure is not harmless pressure. And every drain, every faucet, every hidden section of pipe transforms from a tool into a liability the second civilization stops pushing clean water into your home. In a functioning world, the air inside your home feels neutral. You breathe without thinking. You cook without caution. And every window, vent, and electrical system quietly manages the toxins you never notice. But the moment a crisis cuts the power, everything you rely on to keep that air clean collapses. Ventilation stops. Filtration dies. Airflow becomes stagnant. And the invisible threats that were once diluted now begin to concentrate in every corner of your house. Carbon monoxide becomes the first silent enemy. When generators are running outside, when neighbors burn fuel indoors, when improvised heaters are used without ventilation, CO slips through gaps, vents, cracks, and shared walls. It does not announce itself. It does not irritate your lungs. It simply replaces oxygen molecule by molecule until your body shuts down without resistance. A crisis compresses people inside their homes, and compressed people make fatal mistakes, closing windows too tightly, burning fuel too close to entry points, or running equipment in enclosed spaces because stepping outside feels unsafe. The home slowly turns into a low oxygen trap. Next comes the accumulation of volatile organic compounds. Everything inside your house, paints, adhesives, plastics, cleaning chemicals, begins to off-gas faster when temperatures rise during a blackout. These vapors mix with smoke from candles, fumes from battery packs, and gases released from stored fuel. With no active ventilation to disperse them, the air thickens. It irritates your eyes first, then your lungs, then your cognition. Your decision-making degrades exactly when you need clarity the most. But the most dangerous shift happens when you seal the house for security. You close blinds, lock deadbolts, cover windows to block visibility from the outside. You reduce your own airflow to avoid being seen. That is when the home turns into a containment chamber. Every breath you exhale adds moisture to the air. Every flame you light consumes oxygen. Every chemical you open lingers longer than it should. The walls trap everything, and you won't notice the threshold crossing until your body does. Dizziness, confusion, headaches, loss of balance, tunnel vision. These are not symptoms of fear. They are signs you are being poisoned by your own shelter. In crisis, people fear intruders, gunshots, looters. But what kills faster is the air you thought was harmless. Gas buildup does not care how strong you are, how trained you are, or how many supplies you stacked in your basement. It attacks quietly, without confrontation, and without giving you a second chance. In a destabilized world, breathable air becomes a resource just like water, something you must manage, protect, and control. If you fail to treat it as a tactical priority, your own home will suffocate you long before an outsider ever gets close. Electricity feels harmless when it behaves. When the lights turn on, when appliances hum, when the system is stable, you forget that every wire in your home is a controlled burn. Heat confined inside copper, restrained by insulation, and kept in balance by a grid designed to absorb mistakes. But in a crisis, that balance disappears instantly. The grid goes dark. Circuits fall into an unpredictable, unstable state, and every device you own becomes a potential ignition point waiting for the wrong surge. The danger does not come when the power goes out. The real threat begins when it comes back in short, violent bursts. Brownouts, spikes, incomplete restorations. Every surge hits your home like a hammer. Capacitors inside old electronics swell and rupture. Insulation on aging wiring heats unevenly. Coils inside refrigerators, freezers, and AC units attempt to restart under load and strain themselves to the edge of failure. What you hear as silence is actually stress building inside the system. Then comes the phenomenon almost no civilian considers: cold electrical faults. When the power dies, dust cools, moisture settles, and microfractures in wires tighten. When the power returns unexpectedly, that shift, just a few degrees, creates arcs. These arcs occur inside walls, behind outlets, inside appliances, and inside devices you haven't touched in years. They smolder. They do not flare up immediately. They sit, hidden, generating just enough heat to begin a slow burn that turns into a house fire hours later, exactly when you think the danger has passed. And in crisis conditions, every house fire becomes a death sentence. There is no fire department responding, no neighbor rushing over. Smoke alarms may not work without power. What begins as a silent electrical fault becomes a rolling wave of heat and toxic smoke that you do not detect until it is too late. The wiring behind your wall does not care that you are already dealing with security threats, water instability, or lack of ventilation. It simply follows physics. Heat rises, insulation melts, flames spread upward through hollow walls, and plastic fixtures release fumes that incapacitate you before the fire ever reaches your room. The threat escalates further when people plug in improvised power solutions. Cheap generators, off-brand inverters, mismatched battery banks. Desperation makes people careless. They overload extension cords, run too many appliances off a single outlet, or connect devices not designed to share circuits. The home becomes an electrical battlefield where every mistake has consequences measured in seconds. In collapse scenarios, electricity is not a convenience. It is a controlled hazard. If you fail to treat it with respect, if you fail to assume that every surge, every restart, and every flicker hides a potential ignition, you will discover the truth the hard way. The first fire you see is usually the one you cannot stop. Every home has a layout you think you understand. Hallways, door frames, corners, staircases, spaces you move through every day without awareness. But in a crisis, these familiar structures transform into tactical choke points, exposure zones, and ambush corridors. The architecture of your home becomes a map of vulnerabilities that an intruder can exploit faster than you can recognize them. When society collapses, people don't enter houses the way they do during normal times. They don't knock, they don't announce themselves, and they don't use the obvious approaches. They study angles, shadows, and blind spots. They test weak hinges, probe dark corners, and look for paths that allow silent entry with maximum concealment. Your home, with all its comfortable design choices, was never built to resist a tactical mind. Doorways become the first liability. A doorway frames your body in perfect silhouette, turning you into a clean target the moment you step through. During crisis, stepping into a doorway without controlling the angle is the architectural equivalent of walking into crosshairs. Any intruder who understands line-of-sight advantage can wait just outside your field of vision and strike before you register movement. Corners shift into ambush points. Inside a stable society, corners simply separate rooms. But in a destabilized world, they become blind arcs, spaces where someone can hide, listen, or prepare an attack while remaining invisible until you cross their threshold. A corner that once felt like nothing more than part of your house suddenly becomes a place where distance collapses from meters to inches. Staircases are even worse. They create forced elevation changes that trap you in predictable movement patterns. Moving upward exposes your entire torso. Moving downward eliminates your ability to retreat. Any individual who understands vertical dominance can control an entire floor from a single well-chosen position. Windows, which once brought light and comfort, become detection points. From the outside, they reveal silhouettes, shadows, and movement. A desperate outsider watching from a distance can identify your position, your routine, and the parts of your home you rely on most. Light leaks, even a faint flicker, expose your location like a beacon in the dark. And then there are the points you never consider. Narrow hallways that compress you into linear paths, closets that provide concealment for intruders long before you hear them, and entry spaces designed for convenience rather than security. These architectural choices become liabilities the second someone decides your home is a resource worth taking. Your house is not a fortress by default. It is a predictable structure with predictable routes and predictable blind spots. And predictability is the first thing a hostile actor exploits. If you fail to map your home the way an intruder would, you will move like a civilian in a world that no longer rewards civilian behavior. Survival demands that you stop seeing your home as a place of comfort and start seeing it as terrain. Terrain that must be controlled, cleared, and constantly reassessed. Because in a crisis, the walls themselves won't protect you. The way you move within them will. Fire inside a stable world is predictable. You smell it, you see it, and alarms warn you long before the danger becomes fatal. But when a crisis strips your home of power, sensors, and response systems, fire changes its behavior. It becomes faster, quieter, and far more lethal. Not because the flames are stronger, but because the environment around you stops giving you the signals you rely on to survive. Modern homes are built with synthetic materials that burn hotter and produce toxic smoke in seconds. But without ventilation, without functioning alarms, and without the ability to call for help, the real threat isn't the flame. It's the unseen layer of superheated gases collecting above your head. This is the thermal layer, and in a crisis, it forms quicker than you can react. As heat rises and accumulates, the air above you becomes hot enough to scorch your lungs even before the fire reaches your room. It creates a ceiling of death that drops lower and lower as the temperature climbs. You won't notice it until you stand, inhale, and collapse before taking your second breath. Smoke behaves differently too. Without airflow from HVAC systems, it doesn't disperse. It pools. It clings to ceilings, fills hallways, and settles in rooms you thought were safe. Visibility drops to zero. Navigation becomes guesswork. And worst of all, synthetic smoke is not just smoke. It is a cocktail of carbon monoxide, hydrogen cyanide, and microplastics that knock you unconscious long before flames touch you. You don't outrun this smoke. You suffocate in it. And the ignition source? It doesn't need to be a dramatic event, a candle used during a blackout, a battery pack overheating, a stove left warm after the power cuts mid-cooking, even a spark from the electrical faults described earlier. Any small ignition becomes catastrophic when the home's internal environment can no longer dilute heat or move air. People imagine fire as a roaring blaze tearing through rooms, but in crisis conditions, the deadliest fires move silently, slow, smoldering burns that release dense, toxic smoke before transitioning into full flames. By the time you see the orange glow, you're already breathing poison. A collapse removes the buffers that keep fire survivable: alarms, ventilation, emergency response, and the ability to escape into a safe exterior. When those disappear, your home turns into a sealed container where heat accumulates, smoke thickens, and every second you spend inside narrows your margin for survival. In normal times, fire is a hazard. In a crisis, fire becomes an executioner. And unless you recognize how heat and smoke behave without the systems that normally protect you, your home will turn against you long before the flames ever reach your door. Food inside a stable society is harmless. You store it, refrigerate it, handle it casually, and trust that the systems supporting it, cold storage, sanitation, pest control, will continue working without interruption. But when a crisis shuts those systems down, everything you thought was safe becomes a biological threat waiting to unfold inside your own home. The first transformation happens in your refrigerator. Without power, the internal temperature climbs fast, and every perishable item begins to shift from food to fuel for bacterial growth. Proteins break down. Moisture condenses. Surfaces become slick with microbial activity. What looks edible for a few hours becomes contaminated in less than a day. And the most dangerous part is that you won't see it or smell it until exposure has already happened. A single contaminated ingredient can trigger illness that weakens your body exactly when strength is your most valuable resource. But the real danger emerges when the crisis forces you to stockpile supplies. Bags of rice, sacks of flour, canned goods, dried foods, items that normally sit untouched for months, become targets for rodents and insects seeking shelter and calories. With sanitation services disrupted and outdoor conditions hostile, pests migrate indoors. They chew through packaging, leave droppings, and introduce pathogens that spread invisibly across your storage areas. A single tear in a bag of grain becomes a contamination point for your entire pantry. Then comes the behavioral shift humans tend to overlook. In a crisis, people ration improperly. They open too many containers at once. They fail to reseal food. They store supplies in warm areas because the cold isn't available. They keep leftovers longer than they should because they don't want to waste resources. Every one of these choices becomes a vector for bacterial growth. In survival conditions, the stomach is not just part of the body, it is a vulnerability. One case of food poisoning, one infection from contaminated surfaces, can incapacitate you for days. And during collapse, days of weakness are an invitation for danger. Even tools used for preparation, knives, cutting boards, pots, become risks when water access is inconsistent. Without proper cleaning, they accumulate residues that harbor bacteria. Cross-contamination becomes unavoidable. The home kitchen, once a safe and controlled environment, transforms into a biological battlefield. But the threat goes deeper than stored food. Trash builds up. Organic waste decomposes. The absence of routine disposal turns your home into a microclimate of odors, moisture, and bacterial spread. This attracts more pests, more insects, and eventually, predators that follow them. What begins as poor food storage escalates into a chain reaction of biological hazards. In stable times, food is nourishment. In crisis, food becomes a liability, one that can sicken you, expose you, or weaken you when you can least afford it. If you fail to manage it with precision, contamination will overtake your home long before hunger ever does. Every home has its own acoustic signature, a pattern of echoes, vibrations, and resonance that you never notice because the world outside is louder. But during a crisis, when streets fall silent and human activity drops to a minimum, sound becomes one of the most dangerous liabilities inside your home. Not because it harms you directly, but because it exposes you. Noise turns into a beacon, and your home becomes an amplifier. When the power grid collapses, the constant background hum disappears. No HVAC drones, no refrigerators cycling, no traffic outside. In that silence, every movement you make becomes magnified. A footstep on tile, a cupboard closing, a whispered conversation, the click of a lighter. Sounds that previously blended into the environment now travel through walls, floors, and air cavities with unsettling clarity. You may not hear them yourself, but someone outside will, especially someone hungry, desperate, or searching for signs of resources. This shift is intensified by the design of modern homes. Hollow core doors, thin drywall, shared vents, and open floor plans create pathways that carry sound farther and sharper than older, denser structures. A dropped can in your kitchen can be heard 2 rooms away by someone standing outside your window. The metallic clink of a tool can travel through connected ducting into the exterior walls. Your home becomes a broadcast system transmitting your activity to anyone listening, and people will be listening. In a crisis, sound becomes intelligence. Desperate individuals scout silently at night, pausing to identify homes with movement, conversation, or activity. They map which houses are occupied, which ones have supplies, which ones have families, and which ones are worth breaking into. You aren't just making noise, you are providing data. The danger becomes worse when your home creates sonic hotspots, areas where specific frequencies amplify due to the geometry of the room. Sharp corners, long hallways, and bare surfaces reflect sound instead of absorbing it. A pot set on a countertop, a single can tipping over, or a chair scraping the floor can echo louder than you expect. These acoustic reflections travel through windows and vents, revealing your presence even if you remain visually hidden. People underestimate how much their daily routines betray them. Boiling water, moving furniture, opening packaging, even shifting your weight on certain floorboards. In silence, these sounds carry like signals. And once an outsider hears a sound, they don't need to break in immediately. They simply wait, observe, and build a pattern of your life. Eventually, they identify when you're awake, when you're distracted, and when your guard drops. Inside a functioning world, noise is background. Inside a collapsed world, noise is betrayal. If you fail to control the sound signature of your home, if you fail to understand how sound travels, resonates, and reveals, you will announce your presence long before you ever realize you're being watched. In normal times, the objects inside your home feel harmless. Furniture, shelves, appliances, decorations. You interact with them every day without a second thought. But when a crisis disrupts stability, these everyday items stop behaving predictably. The subtle structural weaknesses you've ignored for years suddenly turn into threats that emerge without warning. What once felt like harmless clutter becomes a collection of improvised weapons pointed inward. The first danger comes from vertical load structures. Tall shelves, bookcases, standing cabinets. Anything with height becomes unstable the moment the home shifts from calm to chaotic. When people barricade doors, move furniture, drag supplies, or rush through rooms in low visibility, they strike these structures unintentionally. The impact transfers upward, causing top-heavy items to tip with lethal force. A shelf that stood for 10 years without an issue can fall in 3 seconds when the floor vibrates from a slammed door or when a child leans on the wrong edge. In darkness or smoke, you won't see it coming. Weight becomes trajectory, and trajectory becomes injury. Then there are the mounted objects, TVs on weak brackets, pictures hung on old nails, mirrors secured by aging adhesive. Under normal conditions, gravity holds them in place. But in a crisis, when humidity rises, when walls heat from adjacent fires, or when structural vibrations ripple from outside impacts, those mounts loosen. A wall-mounted television falling unexpectedly is not an inconvenience. It's a blunt force hazard capable of incapacitating you instantly. And once you're down, your home becomes an even more hostile environment. Small appliances become another overlooked threat. Microwaves, monitors, speakers, countertop ovens, anything resting near the edge of a surface can slide, fall, or shift when bumped in low light, during a struggle, or under sudden movement. Each one carries enough weight to cause injury, especially when dropped from standing height. Crisis conditions magnify every mistake. A stumble becomes a fall becomes impact becomes vulnerability. But the danger doesn't stop with objects. Structural elements of the home, loose ceiling panels, aging light fixtures, unstable attic access points, become compromised when heat, moisture, and vibration accumulate. If a fire smolders in one room, plastics soften, screws loosen, adhesives weaken. The ceiling above you becomes a potential collapse zone. Even minor structural failure can produce falling debris sharp enough to cut skin or heavy enough to break bone. And in survival situations, an injury isn't just pain. It's a reduction in mobility, awareness, and the ability to defend yourself. There's also a psychological factor civilians rarely consider. In a crisis, you use your home differently. You stack supplies, you block hallways, you convert rooms into storage zones. The environment becomes cluttered, unbalanced, and crowded. When visibility drops, every sharp edge becomes a cutting hazard, every protruding object a tripping point. Injuries don't need to be severe to be deadly. A deep cut can become infected when clean water is scarce. A sprained ankle can immobilize you when you need to move quickly. A bruised rib can compromise your breathing in smoke-filled rooms. In stable times, your home's objects are tools. In crisis, they are threats shaped by gravity, weight, and your own vulnerability. If you fail to account for how these items behave under stress, the home you trust will injure you long before any outside danger reaches your door. A home in normal times is a place of comfort, predictable, familiar, and forgiving. But in a crisis, predictability becomes a trap, and familiarity becomes a weakness. Everything you relied on to keep you safe, utilities, structure, airflow, routines, collapses. What remains is a shell that must be managed, controlled, and reshaped with tactical discipline. Survival is no longer about living in your home. It's about commanding the space as if it were contested terrain. The 8 threats you've seen are not theoretical. They are mechanical, physical, biological, and behavioral realities that reveal themselves the moment stability dies. Water pressure shifts into contamination. Air becomes a toxic trap. Electricity turns into an ignition source. Architecture becomes a map of ambush points. Heat and smoke move unpredictably. Food becomes a vector for disease. Sound betrays your presence. And the objects you live with every day become weapons waiting for the wrong moment. You do not defeat these threats by reacting to them. You defeat them by transforming your home from a passive environment into an actively controlled stronghold. That begins with understanding OPSEC inside your own walls. Every movement must be deliberate. Every noise must be minimized. Every structural point must be inspected. You must manage water with the precision of someone who knows contamination spreads silently. You must treat breathable air as a limited resource rather than a guarantee. You must assume that every circuit, every wire, every device is a potential point of failure. Your home becomes a system, and systems require discipline. A fortified home is not one filled with weapons or barricades. It is one where every threat has been accounted for and neutralized before it activates. It is a space that does not betray you through sound, light, heat, or routine. It is a container that protects you because you understand its weaknesses better than anyone who might approach it. Crisis exposes civilians, but it sharpens survivors. Those who adapt their mindset, map their environment, and control their resources outlast those who trust normalcy to return. Safety is not restored. It is created, enforced, and maintained through vigilance. When the world outside collapses, the home does not automatically shield you. You shield the home. And only a home under control becomes a fortress capable of keeping you alive until the world stabilizes again.